incorrect, then they suggest changes, and you make those changes, and then you've got the basis for your test. Now, if you don't have access to those folks, then maybe you have access to users' guides, online help, something like that, in which case you could possibly derive the diagrams from the text. Now, that's not necessarily going to be 100% every time, but in a lot of cases it will work. So, for example, the diagram that I showed you for the e-commerce application, I derived that just from observation of how our website worked, right? And similarly, those of you who are working on backup systems here, I would think you could just, from common sense, figure out, okay, well, these are how these things work. These are the different states that they can be in. So the diagram might be something that you create, and then you expand it as your understanding of the application evolves. In that case, it becomes a tool that helps you create test cases and not forget things, right? Obviously, it's nice if these are given to you as part of the system design specification or something, but maybe you get them, maybe you don't. Let's see, we've got a question here from Rich Agnello. Is the state transition model best designed within the system or UAT context of the V model? For clients desiring end-to-end validation, can we define systems across the unit or define states across the unit or system integration topology? I don't think there's any real intersection between the level of testing you're doing and whether this technique works or not. So, for example, if you're testing a unit, then you could talk about the states that a given class or objects could take on. If you're testing integration testing or running integration tests, then it seems like the system could be in various states depending on communications that are happening or data flows that are happening. So I don't think there is that limitation of this is a technique that applies primarily at the higher levels. That is the case for use case testing in most cases, because use case testing is an end-to-end kind of test, so it's particularly applicable to system test and system integration test and user acceptance test, but not so much for unit test and component integration. But for state models, no. I think those can apply at different levels. Question from Mike Ellis. Can this fit into an Agile method? Sure. No reason why not, though I would expect that if you're doing Agile testing in an Agile situation, you'd want to minimize your documentation. So you might just have the diagram and state transition table and the switch table and just generate your tests on the fly from those without actually having them documented. If anybody has questions here, you just jump in at any point. Just reading them off the panel here. That's a question from Dave. Do organizations using state-based techniques consult with development in order to validate the states? More of a white box approach, or is a black box approach preferred in order to retain objectivity as from a user's point of view? I would think that if you've got the development team available to you, you should talk to them about the diagram. Show your diagram to them and have them comment on it. I wouldn't necessarily say validate in the sense of they get to approve or reject the diagram, right? If they say, well, this can't be because of this or this or that, then you're still free to say, well, I don't believe those reasons. I'm still going to try it, right? If you've created the diagram, it's a tool for you to create tests. But certainly in any circumstance where you can gather input from the programmers and the designers, I think that's a good thing to do. I know I've heard this argument about don't talk to the programmers, don't talk to the developers, designers, because that'll compromise your objectivity. But I don't think that's necessarily the case. You gain new information from them. It's always better as a tester to know more of that rather than less. Unless Mephistopheles happens to be one of your developers, you're worried about being turned to the dark side or something. Dave Orleans, the guy with the previous question, responds, he is. So, Dave, if you smell sulfur when one of the developers comes around the corner, then that's the guy not to talk to. So, you hear the clatter of a cloven hoof on the tile. Okay, any other questions here, you guys? Yeah.
Sure. An optimum level for the end switching coverage, or maybe conversely, is there a point at which it's just overkill?
Yeah. So how far to take the switch coverage? Well, let's suppose that you like the idea of covering sequences of transitions and you want to extend that out indefinitely. Would you use that model to do it? No. What you would do is you'd use something that's often called a dumb monkey, which is a automated random test tool that is able to traverse things like menu structures and so forth by sort of picking at random, do I go this way or do I go that way? And then it knows how to get back to its home state and so forth. And you build one of those things, and usually they have a fairly simple what's called test oracle built into them. As long as the system keeps responding, then I'm happy, because that means it hasn't been crashed or gotten into a weird state, right? If it gets wedged, then it stops, and you try to reconstruct how it got there. So I think if you want to test really long sequences of states, often from a reliability perspective, then that dumb monkey approach is the better way to go. If you want to test some length of sequences manually because you're worried about particular kinds of malfunctions that would occur, then I would think that you could kind of reason out how long that sequence would need to be, and use that switch technique. Now, it's possible that that can be less work than it might otherwise appear, because what can happen is if there are not a lot of outbound transitions from the states, then the tables actually can be smaller than you might think. And also, if there are a lot of situations where once you've entered into a given state, that pretty much clears your history and resets the application, then that can make a whole sequence of transitions no longer really interesting, and you can eliminate them. So there are ways to kind of prune those switch tables to try to get them to focus on the stuff that you really care about. And I'd recommend doing that. I think it's just sitting down and arbitrarily creating like a switch table that goes up to like 5 transitions long or something is going to